think commoners get a bit of a bad reputation. They've got, what, 4 hit points? Completely basic stats? Any fight with a commoner is guaranteed to end in their death. Despite this, they all seem to carry a club, which I think is really bizarre in itself. Like, imagine if just everyone on the street had a club. So I've been thinking about ways to make them a little more interesting, and I came up with this concept of using the commoner as a character class. One of the things I really enjoy about Dungeons & Dragons is the ability for dungeon masters, game masters, whatever term you want to use, to come up with their own content and bring their own creations into the game. So this is something that I've been playing with. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this when I'm finished. So this is what I'm thinking. A commoner class player would start with 10 for every stat. 10 strength, 10 dexterity, 10 constitution, 10 wisdom, 10 intelligence, 10 charisma. I mean, the commoner stat block by default only has 4 hit points. I would maybe be a little generous and up that to maybe, say, a D8? Or maybe a D4 plus 4? Just to give players something a little extra to work with. They would then receive 1 ability point per level to use as they see fit. So they can add this to whichever they feel they want to add it to, whatever makes sense for their character. Now, characters can multi-class with this system, but they can only do that once they have the basic minimum stats for that class. So you need a 13 in your class's basic stat before you can actually multi-class. So that would mean, for example, if you wanted to be a fighter, you'd need to have 13 strength. All your other stats would still be 10 if you hadn't leveled up any of the others, and you wouldn't get any additional ability points until you went back and did another level in commoner, apart from the ones that you get as part of the fighter level up. So where this becomes interesting is that players will be allowed to choose a profession for their character, and that would form the basis of what they were good at. So they would get not only an additional ability point for that profession, they would also get proficiency in 1 skill that was related to that profession. So a blacksmith, for example, would have strength as their additional ability point, and most likely athletics, because they would be using their strength to wield a hammer and construct swords or armor, or more likely horseshoes, that sort of thing. Shepherd would receive wisdom and would clearly get a bonus for animal handling. A hunter, dexterity maybe for bow use, or wisdom for tracking, and then survival would clearly be their skill. A storekeeper would maybe have an extra point of charisma, and would gain a persuasion point, or possibly a deception point, depending on how scrupulous a business person they were. Librarian or bookkeeper would gain an intelligence point, and a point of history, maybe arcana. There's also a priest, and I'm not thinking like a cleric, I'm thinking more like a village priest. And they would receive either a wisdom point, which would lead them down the cleric pathway, or actually intelligence, because weirdly a religion check, proficiency in religion, that's an intelligence-based skill. So that might actually be more suitable for a priest rather than a cleric. And the last one I came up with was like a police officer, not necessarily a guard, more like an inspector, someone who would investigate crimes. And they would receive intelligence point for investigation. Intimidation could be another one for them as well, depending on what route they went down. There's just a few ideas for professions. There are probably loads more that would make sense, and I think it would be up to the DM and the players to come up with a profession for their characters and just have it make sense within the world. So this doesn't work in a number of scenarios. This doesn't really work if there are other players taking normal character classes. So there's 2 ways I see this working within a campaign. The first is that you base your entire campaign around the concept of the commoner. So thinking of a very local-centric story, something centered around a town or a village. Possibly it could take place entirely within a city. And the stories would be relatively mundane, would involve maybe characters, more powerful characters, attempting to assert their will or their influence over this area, and the commoners rising up, because in this world, in this campaign, you cannot rely on a hero to come and save the day. Sometimes you need to become that hero. So I'm thinking a little bit like the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, or a fair few characters in Game of Thrones. They're not particularly special or skilled, they just happen to be the only people who were available at the time. That could work. And I think that would lead to a very personal story. And I think that there would be a lot that a DM could do as a storyteller, and players as members of that story, to do something really intimate with the characters in the village or the town, and just getting to know the area, getting to know the locals. And when something bad happened, they'd really feel it. And it would be a very grounded, realistic tale. The other thing to bear in mind with this particular campaign concept is money. Normally in a D&D campaign, within the first few levels, your players are already some of the richest people out there. They are able to just walk into a tavern, buy the most expensive room, the most expensive ales, whatever they want. And actually, the lower coins, the copper and the silver, are almost joke coins. They just sort of get rounded up to gold and no one really thinks about them. So it'd be interesting to have a campaign where actually earning a few copper or a couple of silver would actually be really meaningful to your characters. It would allow them to buy food for another day. So possibly this would end up being a much more survival-based campaign than some of your players might be used to. The other way that this could work would be in making this almost the prologue, or even the backstory, if you like, of a future campaign. So you have your players, you have your characters coming from the village or the town, and they've got their professions, they've got a little bit of ability, a little bit of skill in a certain area, but not a lot. Something happens, something drastic that means they have to take up arms, and they have to work together to defeat whatever it is that's threatening the local area. Through this, they would then, after a few sessions, effectively complete what would be a starter adventure, effectively filling in their backstory for the characters. And then they would get the opportunity to become a level 1 character of whichever class they wish, but with the additions of their commoner class that they had already played. So effectively, you're almost playing a prologue and then using that to add a little bonus to the start of a campaign. You'd have to be careful not to let this get too overwhelming and become too overpowering, but I think that that could provide a little bit of a different way to begin a game, rather than you are a wizard, you are a fighter, just you're some guy, and you gotta do this because no one else is going to. So this is something that's been rattling around in my head for weeks now, and I've wanted to make a video about it for a while. I think there's a lot of fleshing out that would still need to be done as far as a class concept and a game and campaign concept, but I think there's something in this, and I think if you had the right group of players who were willing to roleplay, and the DM with the right story, and everyone was on the same page, I think this could be a really enjoyable way to either begin a campaign or run an entire storyline. What do you think, though? I am really interested in your comments on this one, so please leave me a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, a like will let me know and will help me make more videos. If you want to see more content coming from me, then you can hit subscribe, and you can also hit the notification bell to make sure you're notified every time a new video comes up. Also, I'd love it if you'd share this video with your DM, with your players, friends, anyone you think might enjoy it. That would be really, really useful to me. So thanks very much for watching. I'll see you later.